Forged and Risen, Podcast Episode 3, Standards Over Feelings, Chapter 1. The Problem with Feelings. Welcome back to the Forged and Risen podcast. This is where we build discipline, we build identity, and we rebuild lives from the ground up. No fluff, no hype, no empty motivation, just real systems that actually hold when life gets hard. Before we get into this, if you're serious about changing your life, not just listening to it, go to forgedandrisen.com. That's where the books are. That's where the podcast lives. That's where the real work begins. Because you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. Let's get into this. Today we're talking about something simple but uncomfortable: standards over feelings. And here's the truth most people avoid. You already know what to do. You know what your life would look like if you were disciplined. You know what your morning should look like. You know the habits you need to build and the ones you need to eliminate. You already know. So the problem isn't knowledge, it's not information, it's not access, it's not intelligence, it's not even opportunity. The problem is execution. And if we strip this all the way down, the reason you're not executing is because you don't feel like it. That's it. You don't feel like doing the hard thing when it's time to do it. And that right there was where most people lose. Not because they're incapable, but because they've built their life around how they feel. And feelings are unstable. They don't just change day to day. They change moment to moment. You can wake up focused, clear, locked in, and by the afternoon, you're tired, distracted, off track. Same goals, same vision, same person, different outcome. Why? Because your actions changed based on your feelings. And when your actions change like that, your results become inconsistent. You start strong, then you fall off. You get motivated, then you disappear. You commit, then you break your word. Not because you can't do it, but because your system is built on something that doesn't hold under pressure. And pressure is where life actually happens. Not on your best days, but on your hardest ones. So if your system only works when you feel good, you don't have a system, you have a mood. And moods don't build anything. They don't build discipline. They don't build consistency. They don't build results. They build cycles. Up, down, on, off, over and over again. And here's what that does over time. It wears you down because you're constantly starting over, constantly resetting, constantly rebuilding momentum you just lost. And every time you restart, it gets a little heavier, a little harder, a little more frustrating. And eventually, you stop trusting yourself. You say you're going to do something, and then you don't. No one else may notice, but you feel it. And that matters. Because every time you break your word to yourself, you chip away at your identity. You weaken the belief that you're someone who follows through. You start to question yourself. You start to doubt your discipline. You start to wonder if maybe you're just not that person. But that's not true. You're not lacking ability. You're lacking structure. You're relying on feelings instead of standards. And feelings will lie to you. They'll tell you to wait. They'll tell you to delay. They'll tell you tomorrow is better. They'll tell you just this once won't matter. They'll tell you you've had a long day. You deserve this, and it sounds right. It feels right, but it keeps you exactly where you are because tomorrow turns into next week. Next week turns into next month. And before you know it, you're still in the same place. Not because you didn't want more, but because you never built something strong enough to carry you when you didn't feel like it. That's the problem. And until you understand that, you'll keep repeating the same cycle: motivation, action, fall off, reset, repeat, over and over again. So if you take anything from this, take this. Your feelings are not reliable. They are not a system. They are not a strategy. They are not a foundation. They are temporary. And if your life is built on something temporary, your results will always be temporary too. Take a breath. Next, we build the standard. Chapter 2, Building the Standard. Take a breath. Let everything from the last chapter settle for a second. Because if chapter 1 was the truth, this is where everything changes. Here's the shift. You stop asking, how do I feel today? And you start asking, what's the standard? That question alone will change your life because it removes emotion and replaces it with direction. Most people wake up and they check in with their feelings. Am I tired? Do I feel motivated? Do I have energy today? And based on those answers, they decide how they're going to show up. That's the problem, because now your life is being dictated by something unstable, something inconsistent, something that changes constantly. Standards don't change. They don't care how you feel. They don't care if you're tired. They don't care if you're stressed. They don't care if it's inconvenient. They stay the same. And that's exactly why they work. A standard is simple. It's a decision you've already made before the moment shows up, not in the moment, before it. Because in the moment, you're emotional, you're reactive, you're influenced by how you feel. But when the decision is already made, there's nothing left to debate. You don't wake up and decide if you're going to show up. You've already decided. You don't negotiate. You don't hesitate. You execute. That's the difference. And most people don't understand this. They think discipline is about willpower. It's not. Willpower is temporary. Standards are permanent. Willpower says, I'll try. Standards say, this is what I do. That's a completely different identity. So let's make this real, not theory, real life. You don't feel like working out. Old mindset. I'll go later. I'll skip today. I'll make it up tomorrow. Standard mindset. I train. That's what I do. No discussion. No internal debate. No emotional negotiation. You don't feel like staying focused. Old mindset. I just need a break. I'll get back to it later. Standard mindset. I execute. That's the standard. You don't feel motivated. Good. Because motivation was never reliable. Standards are, and here's where it gets powerful. When you start living by standards, you remove decision fatigue. You remove hesitation. You remove that constant back and forth in your mind because the decision is already made. And when the decision is already made, your energy goes into execution, not negotiation. That alone will change your productivity, your consistency, your results. But more importantly, it changes your identity because now you're not someone who tries, you're someone who does. And identity is everything. You don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems, and your systems are built on your standards. Now, here's the part most people miss. Standards have to be clear, not vague, not emotional, not dependent on how you feel that day, not I'm going to be better, that's weak, that's undefined, that leaves room for negotiation, but I wake up at this time, I train this many days. I don't miss. That's a standard. Clear, defined, non-negotiable. And once it's defined, you follow it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it, because that's when it matters most. Anyone can show up when they feel good. That doesn't build anything. Standards are proven on the days you don't. That's where discipline is built. That's where identity is forged. That's where you separate from who you were and become who you said you would be. And here's what starts to happen over time. You build trust with yourself because now when you say you're going to do something, you do it. No excuses, no delays, no breakdown in execution. And that builds confidence, real confidence, not hype, not motivation, not temporary energy, proof that you follow through, proof that you're consistent, proof that you are who you say you are, and that changes everything. Because now you don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel motivated. You don't need the perfect moment. You move because that's who you are now. And once that locks in, your life stops being reactive and starts becoming intentional, not driven by emotion, but driven by standard. Take a breath. Let that sit. Because in the next chapter, we're going to talk about the real battle, the voice in your head that tries to break these standards. Chapter 3, the battle in your mind. Take a breath. Because this is the part nobody prepares you for. You can understand standards. You can define them. You can even commit to them. But the moment you try to live by them, the real battle starts. And it doesn't happen outside of you. It happens inside. The moment you raise your standards, your mind will push back. Immediately, not later. Not eventually, right away. You'll hear it, clear as day. You can skip today. You've already done enough. You deserve a break. You'll start fresh tomorrow. This isn't that big of a deal. And here's the dangerous part. It won't sound weak. It won't sound like an excuse. It will sound reasonable. It will sound logical. It will sound justified. It will sound like you. That's why most people lose here, not because they don't know better, but because they believe the voice. And that voice has been running your life longer than you realize. It's the same voice that told you to quit before, the same voice that told you to wait, the same voice that kept you comfortable and kept you stuck. But now you're trying to change. You're trying to raise your standards. You're trying to become someone different. And your mind doesn't like that because your brain is wired for comfort, for efficiency, for survival. It wants what's familiar. It wants what's easy. It wants what requires the least effort. And standards require friction. They require effort. They require discipline. They require you to go against what feels natural. So your mind will try to pull you back every time. And it won't do it aggressively. It will do it subtly. It will whisper, not shout. Just this once. You can make it up later. You've been doing good. Take a break. And that's where most people lose, not physically, not if they're mentally. They hesitate. They pause. They entertain the thought. And the moment you entertain it, you're already in a negotiation. And standards don't survive negotiation. They survive decision. That's the difference. Because the second you start going back and forth in your mind, you're no longer operating from standard. You're operating from feeling again. And feelings will always try to win. So here's the reality. Standards don't break all at once. They break one decision at a time. One skipped workout, one delayed action, one moment where you said, not today. And every time that happens, you reinforce the wrong identity. You reinforce the version of you that hesitates, that negotiates, that doesn't follow through. And identity is built through repetition, not intention. So if you repeatedly give in, you're building an identity, whether you realize it or not. But the same thing works in your favor. Every time you override that voice, every time you move anyway, every time you execute, despite how you feel, you build a different identity, you build control, you prove to yourself that you are not controlled by your emotions. And that is real power, not loud power, not external validation. Internal control, the ability to act when everything in you says don't. That's where discipline is built, not when it's easy, not when it feels good, but in the exact moment you want to quit. That moment right there is where your future is decided, because anyone can show up when they feel strong. That doesn't separate you. What separates you is what you do when you don't, when you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're distracted, when you're off. That's where standards are tested. And here's the rule you need to live by. You do not negotiate with that voice. You recognize it, you label it, and you move anyway. You don't argue with it, you don't justify it. You don't give it space to grow, because the more attention you give it, the stronger it becomes. And the more you ignore it, the weaker it gets. At first it's loud, persistent, convincing, but over time, as you stop listening, it loses control. It doesn't disappear, but it stops leading. And you take control. That's the shift. From reacting to deciding, from feeling to executing, from being controlled to being in control. And once you reach that point, everything changes, because now you're no longer waiting to feel ready. You're no longer dependent on motivation. You're no longer controlled by emotion. You act because that's who you are now. Take a breath, because in the next chapter, we lock this in. Identity, standards, and who you become from this point forward. Chapter 4, Identity, who you become. Take a breath, because this is where everything comes together. Up to this point, you've seen the problem. You've seen why feelings don't work. You've seen what standards are. You've seen the battle in your mind. Now, we're going to answer the only thing that really matters. Who do you become from this point forward? Because this was never just about habits. It was never just about discipline. It was never just about doing more. This is about identity. Who you are when nobody's watching. Who you are when it's inconvenient. Who you are when you don't feel like it. Because that version of you is the real one, not the motivated version, not the inspired version, not the version of you that shows up when everything feels good. The real version is the one that shows up when it doesn't. That's the version that builds your life. And most people avoid that truth because it removes excuses, because it forces ownership, because it makes it clear you're not where you are because of luck. You're where you are because of what you consistently do. And what you consistently do comes from who you believe you are. That's identity. So if you want to change your life, you don't start with motivation. You don't start with goals. You don't even start with action. You start with a decision about who you are now, not someday, not when things get easier, not when you feel ready now, because everything changes from that decision. If you decide, I'm someone who shows up no matter what, then your actions follow. If you decide, I don't break my word to myself, then your behavior aligns. If you decide, I execute regardless of how I feel, then discipline becomes automatic. That's the shift from trying is to being. And once that locks in, you don't need motivation anymore. You don't need hype. You don't need the perfect morning. You don't need the right mood, because your identity carries you. It holds you when things get hard. It keeps you moving when you're tired. It keeps you consistent when life gets chaotic. And that's what most people are missing. They're trying to build results without building identity. They're trying to stay consistent without deciding who they are. And that never works, because without identity, everything is temporary. But with identity, everything becomes stable, because now your actions aren't random. They're aligned with who you've decided to be. And that's where standards come back in, because standards are how identity shows up daily. They're not just rules. They're not just structure. They're proof that you are who you say you are. Every time you follow through, you reinforce that identity. Every time you execute, you strengthen it. Every time you don't negotiate, you lock it in deeper. And over time, that becomes automatic. Not forced, not difficult, natural. Because now, it's just who you are, and that's when everything changes. Your consistency becomes effortless. Your discipline becomes normal. Your standards become your baseline. And the things that used to feel hard start to feel required. Not because you have to do them, but because not doing them would violate who you are. That's power. That's control. That's transformation. And that's what this entire episode has been about. Not doing more, becoming more. So if you take anything from this entire episode, take this. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. And your systems are built on your standards. And your standards are built on your identity. So if you want to change your life, you don't chase motivation. You raise your standards and you decide who you are right now. And then you live like it every day. No negotiation, no excuses, no waiting, just execution, because that's who you are now. Take a breath. If this hit you, don't just listen to it, apply it. And if you're ready to go deeper, to build real discipline, real structure, real identity, go to forgedandrisen.com. That's where the books are. That's where the podcast lives. That's where the work begins. This is Forged and Risen, and I'll see you in the next one.